If you've been flirting with the idea of starting a podcast, maybe it's been on your mind for a little while and you aren't quite sure whether or not you should actually do it, this video is for you. I have 5 questions you absolutely have to ask yourself to help you determine whether or not a podcast is something you should invest your time and energy in. And be sure to stick around to the end where I share the bonus tip that I just learned from actually going through this process of launching a podcast myself that I wish somebody would have told me. And I am so glad that I now know it and I would love to share it with you. Okay, let's go. We're just meeting. Hi, I'm Goodrich. I am a photographer, director, creative here on YouTube, and I am recently launching a podcast. So I have a pretty good idea of all the questions that it takes to really understand whether or not this is the move for you. So before we dig into the video, I have a favor to ask. If at any point this video resonates with you, can you just do me a favor and click that like button? It really helps the YouTube algorithm. It helps my videos get seen. And then also it just, gives me warm and fuzzies inside to know that you like my stuff, because I do this and it makes me happy that you like it. Okay, let's get to it. If you were on the fence, and I totally resonate with this because I have been thinking about starting a podcast for at least 4 years, and I've hemmed and hawed, I have notes, I bought ebooks, like all the things to try to figure out how to get this train starting. And the theme was, it never quite happened. Because the truth is, like anything, it's going to take a lot to get something off the ground. It's a lot of time, energy, dedication. And the question is always, is this something that's going to be worth it? And is it something I'm going to be interested in? All the things. So I'm going to take you through these 5 questions that you absolutely need to ask yourself. Let's start with number 1. Is there a topic or idea that you can't get enough of? Something that you find yourself thinking about, pastimes, whatever, conversations you love having, something you just cannot get enough of? If the answer is yes, good. 1 point for podcast. If the answer is no, you either need to go back to the drawing board, get some thinking, or ditch the idea straight up front. Because a podcast needs to be consistent, and you need to be able to anchor it around a theme or a niche, really find out what it's about. Now, it's okay if when you're starting, you don't know exactly what it is. The truth of a podcast is it's going to take some time to grow. So you need something that you can keep coming back to that still remains interesting to you. Because the biggest thing with podcasts, with YouTube videos, with any kind of content creation is it needs to be authentic. You have to be able to sense that the person who's creating this is legitimately interested in what's happening. And if we don't get that, we won't tune in, we won't listen, and your podcast won't grow. Number 2, do you have a reason to build an audience? Now, this is kind of like a weird question, right? But one of the things I really recommend for content creation in general, whether it's a podcast or a YouTube video, is that it's actually a great way to get clients, to build awareness, to build authority in your niche. And for me personally, I was a commercial photographer. I wanted to set myself apart from everybody else. I wanted to demonstrate what I knew, that I was good at all these things, blah, blah, blah. And so what I was able to do was create behind the scenes content to start talking about my work, and that really positioned me in a place where I became an authority. I started teaching on subjects of photography, things people need to know. You can really leverage a podcast to help you drive traffic, drive energy to whatever it is you really want to do. However, there is kind of a dark side with building an audience. It makes you responsible to them. I've even experienced this with my YouTube channel. Once it pops off, once you start really getting subscribers, they've signed up for a certain type of content. They've signed up for a certain kind of frequency. And if you're not able to do that, to deliver, you're really letting a lot of real-time, real human beings down. So this is a powerful question to ask yourself as to whether or not a podcast is right for you. Are you able and willing to put yourself out there? This is something that we don't quite realize because sometimes we think of podcasts alone in our room or whatever. But if you aren't able to market your podcast, if you aren't able and willing to put it out there, to share it on your Facebook, to put it in places where people can find it, nothing will ever happen from it, and all the time that you spend will be in vain. You really have to create an engine that gets people to your podcast. And the thing about it is it makes you super, super vulnerable, because what you're doing is saying, hey, I want you to see this thing. Hey, I want you to listen over here. And that is a deeply vulnerable act. We get a lot of imposter syndrome that kicks up where you think, oh, everybody's going to think, who does she think she is? Everybody's starting a podcast. What, she thinks she's going to be successful? We tell ourselves, and I'm saying this because I do the same thing, right? I'm not immune to this by any means. I just have figured out how to hear that, thank it, release the thought, and do the thing anyways, because whatever you're putting out to the world is not helpful if people can't find it. If you're thinking about doing an interview podcast, you have to reach out to people. You have to ask to have them on. If you're saying, well, that's fine, I'm just going to do a solo podcast, you still have to put yourself out there. You have to share it places that it can get seen. So it's really this process of continually being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. If that is a yes, something that you're willing to do, regardless of how difficult and soul-sucking it can be and how much pain it can give you in your solar plexus, give yourself another tick. Okay, real talk. This one is the one. This is a question that you really need to have a firm yes on if you want to do any kind of content creation. Would you create a podcast if you knew that you were going to get no traction, no listeners, no money for 2 years? And that meant you were going to be creating consistently over that time, seeing zero growth. Now, this is a weird question to ask yourself, right? Because there's always the magical part of you, or at least of me, that's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. This is going to blow up. It's going to be amazing. But the truth is, we don't know that it's going to happen. And I speak from personal experience with my YouTube channel. It took me 2 years to get 1,000 subscribers. And then one day, magically, I post this video, nothing happens. And then 3 months later, all of a sudden the algorithm picks it up. And now I was going to say a quarter of, like, you know how people say a quarter of a million, but I have a quarter of 100,000. I don't think that makes sense. A quarter of 100. Anyways, I have over 25,000 amazing, beautiful, talented, wonderful subscribers that I'm so grateful for. And there's no way that I would have known that that was going to happen, because there were a lot of times in those 2 years that I felt really dejected, like nothing's happening. This is my question. You have to go into it, stay consistent, bet on yourself, be confident that what you're creating is eventually going to grow an audience over time. And if you don't have the patience to do that, if you don't have the belief and the faith to do that, it's going to be a very hard slog and you're going to quit. You might as well not start. I know that was kind of a downer, right? Which is not my intention to discourage you at all. But it's just to say that a lot of times you need to build the thing. You need to get a lot of momentum, and you don't know how long it's going to take. And there are so many stories about so many creators that it took way longer than they thought. And then all of a sudden it clicked, and then it spread like confetti at a birthday party. You know what I'm saying? Last question. Is this something that you feel called to do? Now, this kind of sounds a little bit woo-woo, a little bit weird, but hear me out. I definitely believe that we all have, and for me, it's like right in my solar plexus right here, we all have a gut, that inner sense of knowing that it's like, yes, you should be doing this thing. And that gut is really this source of wisdom. And whether or not you're religious or spiritual or whatever it is, this is how you can think about it. This is how I do. All of your life experiences, even the things that you don't remember, are registered in your body. There's somewhere, there's a memory in there, right? There's some part of you that's clocking everything that's happening. So there's a part of you that's different from your immediate consciousness that remembers about you, might remember something that you thought 4 years ago. Like for me, remembered 4 years ago that I said I wanted to start a podcast. There's this internal knowing. And a lot of times we shut that off. A lot of times we're like, yeah, but is this going to do this? Or yeah, but everybody says it's not going to be successful. And that internal knowing is what I call your internal guidance system. That is the thing that's going to lead you to your truest path of being the most you need to be. I call listening to this being bold. If you are bold, you're somebody who's going to listen to yourself, listen to your taste, listen to your idea, the potential that you could see in yourself that maybe nobody else can see, and you're going to listen to that above everything else. If you don't have that, that doesn't mean you shouldn't start a podcast, but it means that it's going to be much more difficult, maybe. It means you might give up. It means that it might not turn out to be the right fit for you. But if you have, and it can be the smallest little nudge, if you find yourself on the couch kind of daydreaming about it, if you keep coming back to certain podcasts and thinking like, I could do that, that internal knowing, if that is a yes, then you should absolutely do it. Because at the very least, if it's not successful, you will learn the thing you need to learn to move on to the next thing. Okay? Those are my 5 tips. Go forth into the universe and decide whether or not you're going to create your podcast. If you do, be sure to comment below, because I absolutely want to follow you, support you, all the things. The one thing I will say, having just started a podcast myself. It's launching, by the time this airs, it will probably be launched. It's called the Bold Bitch Podcast, and it is my baby. I'm super excited, but here's the thing. Okay, so this is like the magic bean that grows into a beanstalk that just is really like the undercurrent for everything. You ready? This is some hard truth. You are never going to feel ready. Now, before you kind of click off whatever, you're like, blah, 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 seen it, heard it before, I want to really explain, because this is my personal experience. I'm not somebody who's launched a podcast 10 years ago and that's telling you about how to do things now when I'm so distanced from this process. This is something I have lived through the last 3 months, and I absolutely know you are not going to feel ready in this process. You are not going to have the confidence as you're learning about audio and tech and trying to figure out how to do this. You are not going to feel like you belong. You're going to feel like an imposter. You're going to go through waves of believing and not believing. What I have to say is that that is a part of the journey. Nobody who started their podcast without already having some huge audience or whatever, and even then, usually they still moving into the new space, they feel all these feelings. Nobody launches a podcast without worrying whether or not it's gonna fail. Nobody launches a podcast feeling absolutely ready, ducks in a row. If you feel ready, you're behind the curve. You should have launched 3 months before, right? So just know, it doesn't need to be perfect, and the sooner you start, the faster you can iterate, the faster you can change and grow and pivot and really turn it into the thing that's going to be amazing. Because perfectionism is really the thing that holds us back, right? Thinking it needs to be perfect before we launch. The moment that was really a linchpin for me that took it out of this idea that I kind of wanted to do for 4 years into something that was like, oh, this is happening, is that I quite randomly applied for a grant. I didn't really think about it was gonna happen or whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, you got this grant, which is amazing. It's called the Imagination Project. They're awesome. It was just like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is happening. I have to do this now. And I didn't feel ready, and I just started. And now we're here, and now I'm doing it, and now it's a thing, and now I'm so excited and so proud. And if you would have talked to me 4 months ago, I wouldn't have thought I would be here. And it's just because I started before I was ready. So I hope that if in answering these questions, you feel compelled, called to create a podcast, I sincerely hope that you do. And I'm gonna create more videos on this channel about podcasting, because it's what I'm doing right now. So be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to all videos so you can see them as they come in. And as I said, I love any comments, or even if you share this video with somebody who's maybe thinking about starting it, that would be so amazing. I think you are a badass, and I will definitely listen to your podcast. Bye.